Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 14. My name is Lee. This week we're going to be talking about charging the rich and also talking about anti-terrorism laws. And to help me with that, we've got Vicus. We've got... He didn't say hello. He's there, really, he is. We've got Zeev.
Yo!
And we have Austin.
Unlimited power!
Yeah, Dark Lord of the Sith.
Is this a thing now?
I don't know. Maybe it is. Austin's going to make it a thing, aren't you? All right, let's talk about
Marshall Mathers. I don't know.
Yeah, yes, he's actually Eminem. Yeah. Well, speaking of Eminem and rich people, see that segue. Today, in the media, there was a supposed plan coming out of the Prime Minister and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, talking about potentially charging rich people to send their kids to public schools. Upon which every single politician ran away from it as fast as they could.
Except Andrew Laming.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow. That's
Wow.
interesting.
Libertarians despise so
Yeah,
much.
the
Yes.
patron saint of the Australian Libertarian Society.
He's the only
Universally
liberal
beloved.
that ventures our group.
Yeah.
No, I will say this though. User pays. I love the concept of user pays.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it should be expanded to more things. But also, think about when we sort of avoid this, right? So the general sort of socialist mantra is like from each of the according to their ability to each according to their need. Rich people don't particularly need free education, right? They can afford education. And quite frankly, I think it goes a long way towards cost management. To, basically say, okay, look, education's a safety net. If you're poor and can't afford it, we can help you out with that. Here's a little voucher or, maybe, like even grants, something similar to the Pell Grant system that occurs in the United States. The Pell Grant in the United States is basically like you get a grant from the government and then you pay it back. So that sort of concept. These kind of things can be done. I mean, we sort of do it with HEX where, 25% of your budget is paid for by, 25% of your education is paid for by you, essentially, on a borrowed loan from the government. So I think expanding that out to public schools makes perfect sense. I don't see the problem with it.
I mean, I think for me, the really absurdity of this whole situation, like, okay, Abbott and Co. and, well, actually, to be honest, I know the Western Australian Education Minister also spoke out against this, So Colin Barnett, Tony Abbott are not radicals under any stretch of the imagination for anything remotely resembling small government. What was really weird for me was how quickly the Greens and Labor attacked it, because these guys, their whole bread and butter is attacking rich people and making them pay more money. And here's an idea that would make rich people pay more money.
But this is the thing, guys.
Yeah.
Public schools are not about the wealthy and the poor for these people, because if you look at what they're saying, they're not protesting that wealthy people should be forced to pay more. They're saying that public schools are a means for the community to come together, and of course the conspiratorial libertarian will say they're propaganda shops to indoctrinate the children into subservient beings of the state.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice, but in all seriousness, they do see it as a part of building a cohesive Australian identity, which, if you think about it, I don't know if I agree with a one-size-fits-all Australian identity anyway.
Can I just say,
but
that is literally social engineering. I mean, like, literally social
I know,
engineering.
I know.
We talk that fascists do all the time.
Yes, yeah, well, I agree. This is the thing. People should be allowed to form their own identities through interactions between their parents, between their communities. I don't know if I agree with the idea that a bunch of politicians should be shaping our identities or selecting some bureaucrats to shape them for us.
To that point, I came up with my identity based entirely on Tumblr, which is why I believe I'm an autistic Korean cat.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, the notion that it builds cohesion, I mean, and the guys at the Cato Institute have been really good in this regard when they've talked about this issue, because they point out that what happens is when you have public schooling, you don't pay the direct cost of the education to go, because there's varying quality in public schools. Like in Western Australia, Applecross and Rossmoyne Senior High Schools are the best state high schools, and they typically usually are in the top 10. At least one of them is in the top 10 of in terms of year 12 scores, like, you know, tertiary entrance scores.
Yes.
And then, you know, it's not hard to point out bad schools as well. So you've got this huge spectrum. Not every school can be identical because just how the world works. And so what happens is the price which would otherwise be paying fees gets allocated to housing, because what happens is you have to be able to screen out certain people from schools. Otherwise, everybody wants to go to Rossmoyne, everybody wants to go to Applecross, or whatever it is in Victorian Sydney. And so they say, okay, we'll only take people in this area. And so what happens? Property prices go up, and all of a sudden you've got really expensive houses around those really good schools.
Indeed.
And if any other school were to get better, so in the case of Western Australia, if, you know, Balga or Girraween or Hamilton Hill or whoever else, whatever poor suburb, if they were to somehow make themselves better, all of a sudden property prices would shoot up because everybody would start sending their kids to those schools. So
Which
really
to
this
some
whole
extent
idea that you get this
happen
social
anyway
cohesion...
under any private or public schools, property prices will go up around a good school.
I mean, it's essentially prices whack-a-mole. That is, you try to whack one price and the prices pop up in another regard, in this case, housing prices. So really, this whole notion that you get this social cohesion across private public schools is ridiculous, because, you know, those top public schools won't have any poor kids, because the average price of housing in Applecross or Rossmoyne or wherever is, you know, half as much again as the average median house price, and it would be the same in Sydney and Melbourne and everywhere else. Like, essentially, you're not going to have poor kids, except for maybe some scholarship students.
Well, look, I mean,
should be demand-based pricing, in my opinion.
Well, of course it should be. I mean, and this is something that will improve it. I mean, if we have wealthy people paying for their own education, even in a public school, that means if it's directly paid to that specific school, that means that school will be essentially competing for wealthy kids, which will improve those schools.
Correct. So I actually have some sort of some experience in this, in the sense that how bad it is currently for wealthy parents. So I happened to go to a public school that benefited very greatly from a very rich local community. Now, this is a school in the northern suburbs of Sydney, right? Yeah. And the school that I went to, basically, there's about four big private schools in the area. We had Barker, Knox, Masada, and can't remember the other big one. But yeah, there were four big ones essentially close by, and James Roos was kind of just down the road. But so, you know, all the parents wanted to get into all these really great schools, but if they didn't get in there, right, they still wanted their kids to have an awesome education. So as a result, through the P&C community, you know, P&C being the Parents and Citizens Committee, so that, you know, it's basically like a P&T thing in America, Parents and Teachers sort of thing.
Sure.
So, you know, basically it's a community-based organization, and based on all of these rich people basically being there, wanting to have the best education possible, I remember my school being able to put together enough money to allow kids in year 11 and 12 to go yachting if they wanted to. Like, we actually had a yacht club. And the only other schools that I knew of that had this were, like, big-time private schools.
Yeah.
Now, of course, when the word started getting around about this, right, the Department of Education came down and said, look, that shows favoritism, all of this other stuff, and they clamped down on it. And this was, like, I was in year 7 when this program ended, right? I never got to benefit from it. And not just that, but then we also had, like,
was it paid for by the parents?
It was paid for by the parents entirely, right?
So
They paid
what's
for
the problem?
Wow.
Okay.
Governments are stupid.
Yeah, well,
Motto of this show.
Apparently, it was unfair to the other schools in the area.
Yeah. But what would happen, of course, is that money would pop up in another way. So it might not be through a yachting club, but it'd be through something else, because that's how the world works. You know, you can't defeat prices. I mean, I think for the real reason why I think the Greens and Labor are really against this sort of stuff is because there's this whole facade around, you know, they believe that government is at the heart of everything that needs to be done in the community. So everything has to have the government involved. And if you start saying, well, let's introduce prices, all of a sudden you're taking away from that centralized, you know, government bedrock.
Well, the Department of Education won't be able to make as many choices if wealthy people are making choices.
That's it. So it's essentially it's decentralizing things instead of, and they want it to be centralized. Austin, you've got your hand up.
Well, I just wanted to see, can people hear what I'm saying? Because my microphone is having some issues right now.
Oh, okay, we can hear you now.
Yeah,
But
we can.
yep.
Continue.
I thought he was saying
Okay.
nuclear power.
Yeah. I thought he was raising a hand because we were talking about schooling, and he wants to be heard.
Okay.
I would just walk out in class. I got into a lot of trouble for that, actually.
I can believe that. I can actually believe you yelling out in class.
So I mean, I'd agree. I'm sure we'd all agree that actually charging the rich would move things in the right direction. I mean, ultimately, when I say to my non-libertarian friends who sort of understand that, yes, you can't, prices are important, signaling's important, but we still want to have a safety net. You say, well, okay, let's have government run no schools, because the government doesn't need to run schools.
They actually don't.
It can fund schools without running them. I mean, those two things are linked, because in the end, if you fund them all the time, you end up running them all the time. But let's just say, okay, let's not have them run any schools, and then and essentially move to a voucher system. Provide funding just for the poorest, and then let the middle class and rich people pay for themselves.
So Australia actually does have a completely privatized education system in one area and one area only, right? And that area is postgraduate studies.
Yeah, okay.
Right? And if you look at postgraduate studies in Australia, whose mic is that? That's getting
Yeah, I think that's you, Steve. You want me to turn down the sensitivity of your microphone?
Really? Okay.
It's picking up it's picking up your parents talking in the background, or whoever's talking in the background.
Okay.
I need to cut this little section, but
Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
So just to go quickly through this, so there is an area in Australia which has complete private education, right? And that area is postgraduate studies.
Postgraduate studies, keep going.
Yeah, sorry. There is an area in Australia that has completely private education, and that is in postgraduate studies. And nobody sort of looks at postgraduate studies and goes, hey, look, there is a lack of diversity. There is a lack of, poor people in there. Postgraduate studies is full of people from all walks of life, right? And the thing is, they find ways to make it work. Now, that's adults, right? So that's a little bit different from kids, right? But what I'm saying is,
Point of order. Many postgraduate students actually get money from the government to pursue their postgraduate studies.
that's true, they do. But having said, but the only sort
providers
of
themselves charge the rates they choose to provide.
correct. But the point. Sorry, what?
Which are sometimes negative. So I get up from my department into the government money. So my tuition is effectively negative.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
You're an employee of some kind.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
Go on.
Yeah. No, but what I was saying is, like, generally in postgraduate studies, you don't see a lack of diversity. You don't see, all of a sudden the poor people being locked out or anything. And where they need to pay, they will pay. Where they make money, they make money. Now
you do see dumb people being locked out of postgraduate studies, and no. I mean, I know this sounds.
That's a good point. Okay, fine. I hadn't considered that. There might be dumb kids locked out of education.
Point to make here. It's not just is that this is something that the advocates for public schooling do not want to see at the elementary level. They do not want to see low-performing students locked out of basic education. Though a free market would probably say that some people really shouldn't go all the way through high school. They shouldn't. They shouldn't go all the way through middle school. They should go learn a trade once they realize, like, okay, you have some trouble with numbers and letters and talking and learning. So we're gonna give you, a law degree or something that really doesn't require much intelligence.
Wow. Sticking that knife into Z's back right there.
That's painful.
I mean, ultimately, most of those kids who are dumb are actually dumb because we try to ram them through a school system that doesn't work for them in the first place. Like, when I think of most of the kids who didn't do well at school when I was at school, it was because they weren't. I mean, some of them maybe actually were dumb, but most of them actually seemed quite normal. It's just we have this sausage machine that produces, everybody goes into it.
And kids with attention problems in particular just don't cope. And they could be kind of even quite intelligent people, but they just aren't able to handle the system because, well, they're teenagers and they're teenagers who are more hormonal or something than most, more stubborn than most,
Or
and
just
unable
uninterested
to
by
cope.
the teachers.
Or just uninterested by the teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I was going to say to that effect. I think this was covered slightly in last year's show, maybe. But like I mentioned that I'd met a friend for the first time in like
You met a
ages.
friend.
I
Yeah.
met a friend. Yeah. So I met like this
Shocked.
guy. This guy I knew in like in the first 2 years of high school and like pretty much all of primary school. And the guy was as dumb as a post, right? I used to make fun of him for being stupid, and my bad, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But like he left high school at the age of 10, basically went to hold up one of those stops. You know, he was like one of those sort of roadside workers.
Yeah.
But like he managed to start his own business, and now he's fucking raking in the millions. So,
Yeah.
you know, you don't actually need to go to school, but
Exactly.
at the same time, you should just find something that you like.
And I don't like the idea of absolute levels of intelligence, so it was bad of me to bring that up. But
Yeah.
what it says is there's only a very specific subset of the population who should waste their lives in higher education or
Yep.
in high school education in general.
And that's Austin.
That I am useless in the real world, and therefore I am.
Perfect candidate.
But some people actually have valuable, tangible skills to contribute, and they should be looking to do that as soon as possible, not wasting time overeducating themselves effectively.
Yeah. And I guess this is the difficulty what most people don't seem to think about when they support this centralized system, is that it reinforces this sort of stuff. Like, you know, if you go to them and say, like, what should we do about kids who are struggling at school? Well, it's actually interesting. Like, so one of the guys in the ALS Facebook group shared this great article about, you know, these kids with learning difficulties in Western Australia being locked in rubber rooms because they absolutely lose it. And people throw up their hands and say, oh, that's terrible. You know, it's awful. We shouldn't do that to children. But it's actually quite understandable. Like, if you put these kids who probably don't mesh well with school because they have some sort of autism or whatever, or some sort of learning difficulty, you know, if you try to shove them through the sausage machine, they're going to go crazy. So the only thing to do with crazy kids is lock them up. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to start saying, well, actually, how about we take a different thing where the government isn't in charge of everything, where it's not shoving kids through the sausage machine. Let's have more options. Let's move away from that.
Especially with education, one size does not fit all
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad to see the Abbott government not really making the case for this at all. I mean, this is really something they could sell quite easily. The wealthy people in this country should not be, getting government subsidized doctors' visits, government subsidized hospital visits. I mean, why should my taxes be going towards Gina Reinhardt or anyone earning about as much as I am, frankly?
I'm going to interject and say that no one should be receiving these benefits.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Least of all, the wealthy.
Exactly. I agree.
So,
I agree 100%. But it's an easier argument to make. That's what
Unlike Austin, I'm more on the side of, you know, I'm okay with a safety net as long as it's an actual safety net.
Yeah.
Not a cargo net.
Yeah. Or a trampoline.
Hey, no. So I think one of the things we have to be careful of here, and I support user pays, and I'm against any tax increase, which always raises these sort of difficult edge cases where you have to make sure that the amount you're paying in is not actually a tax. So if you charge everyone, like, say, $30,000 a year, if you're making $1 million a year, that's clearly a tax. That's not a user pays system, because you're paying for your own kid, you're paying for another kid. And it's very, very important that however this would end up being structured would legitimately be a user pays system and not just a cross subsidy from the rich to the poor. Because we already have a system for that, and it's called the progressive income tax, and we do not want to be double dipping by charging rich people more than it costs to educate their kid, and then effectively also taxing them to pay that education. So I think be really careful here when we endorse these sorts of systems that they don't become additional progressive taxation.
Fair comment.
That's a good point. Yep.
Well, we should move on to our other subject of discussion, which is the anti-terrorism laws that are currently before the Parliament, being discussed at various levels by the government, particularly the measure to strip people of their citizenship. At the moment, it's looking like it is going to happen with some sort of restrictions. Fortunately, there were some liberals who actually put their hands up and said, hey, maybe there's some constitutional issues with this whole thing. So yeah, what are people's thoughts at this stage?
I think Zeev knows more about the details on what they've managed to put in there to protect our liberties, finally.
Well, look, the details aren't fully finalized necessarily at this point either. But what the latest information is that they're going to amend the Citizenship Act. And
Can you point out the section so that like some of the people can possibly chase up on?
it is going to be section
Oh,
35 of the
shit.
Citizenship
Stop
Act.
with something.
So section, yes, Austin. Now sit down and be a good boy. So section 35 says that a person ceases to be an Australian citizen if the person is a national or citizen of a foreign country and serves in the armed forces of a country at war with Australia. So it's pretty simple stuff. And you might ask, what does that mean? It means basically that a person ceases to be an Australian citizen the minute they join up or enlist with the foreign army. So the
Basically,
minister
a
gets,
sedition law.
of sorts, that's at war with Australia. So the minister gets information that Joe Bloggs has become a soldier with an army that's at war with Australia. He makes a declaration that the person has ceased to be a citizen. Joe Bloggs, if he comes to Australia, can still go to court and fight that declaration. I'm not a citizenship law expert. I don't know if that fight would be something that he could prove entirely in court, if it would be a battle in the courts essentially where he's leading evidence and the other party leads evidence, or if it would be a much more limited judicial review, which would kind of be the same thing that Peter Dutton has already proposed, really, except in different words.
Which I'm leaning towards being the actual. So there are variations. So, like for example, Nazi war criminals. Australia as a country repealed their citizenship, and I remember the case. So I remember basically there was an argument with a bunch of people on Facebook about this. If you weren't born in Australia, Australia can, and you got an Australian citizenship, the power already exists for Australia to resend your citizenship. Right, and yes, and the only
Nazi war criminals fought against Australia, so they can that under that provision,
well, no, this was before the existence of this provision, so this was under the old act. But but the Australian government rescinded them on ministerial grounds that said that they no longer represented the public interest, and they sent them to the ICC for their proceedings. And I remember, I think it was Peter Phelps who had this argument with me. Basically said. I said like it should have been done by a court in Australia, and he said it was done by judicial review essentially.
Well,
right?
judicial review is more limited. It's not the same as a trial. And this is part of the debate over what Peter Dutton said before, that it should be up to the minister to decide. Yeah, even then there would be judicial review, which would basically say. And judicial review is not saying was Peter Dutton right to make that call to rescind citizenship on the basis of his suspicions. It would be, was there a procedural fault? Did Peter Dutton have any evidence to base his decision? Not was it the best evidence? Not is there conflicting evidence? It's any evidence. It's very limited.
And you know what the best part about that is?
Yeah.
I'll bet you money on it. But that information is going to be classified and can only be heard by a special court. And they will be denied the writ of what's the one where
habeas corpus?
No, not habeas corpus. The one where you have to get the discovery or something. The one where they can launch the procedural case. They won't have the information of what the information of the case.
It's possible. I don't know the details in that area. I'm certainly not a national security lawyer, so
I'm not a national security lawyer at all. But I know
governments are pretty predictable.
I know enough about government to know that that's exactly what's going to happen.
And I think
that's what happens.
I mean, I think it's all good and well to have when I heard that you mentioned that you can people fighting for a foreign government can have their citizenship stripped. That seems pretty reasonable because that sort of thing is relatively clear cut. Like if you join the Nazis, there's going to be like it's part of an overall bureaucracy. They're going to have records. It's it's relatively simple to sort of figure that sort of stuff out. When you start saying, have they joined a terrorist group that has no membership roles, that they might not actually have joined the terrorist group, they might have worked in a hospital that was in terrorist-controlled territory, you know, like you've got... It gets very murky when you start talking about, well, what does that look like? And I think that's kind of the point at which I start to say, well, okay, a ministerial declaration when they've joined a foreign army, okay, I can handle that. A ministerial declaration where there's, you know, in a very murky, unclear environment is really insufficient as far as I'm concerned. Like, I don't have an inherent problem with stripping citizenship. Like, and to be fair, most of the people who are joining ISIS, they're burning their passports anyway. Like they and if you look at the ideology of the group, like they essentially want to call all Muslims to their area. All these Muslims are essentially abandoning their citizenship anyway. So you're not taking anything from them that they don't already want to give up. But it's just the ministerial discretion side of things.
Austin wants to say.
It's not about the fact that we're taking citizenship away from these assholes who go and fight for ISIS. I don't think anyone's going to lose.
It's about the next one.
It's about setting a precedent saying that we can have ministers take away citizenship without any process. That's the scary part.
That's not true. There will be a process. They just don't have to reveal it on national security grounds.
Well, this is the thing, but you know, you've got to keep in mind, and I think I've mentioned Muhammad Hanif before, but I'm mentioning him again. The reality is that there are people out there who will be, if the laws are too loose, there are people out there totally uninvolved in terrorism who will be
might be
swept up
innocent.
in them and adversely affected by them.
Yeah.
There might be innocent people running free. What a travesty!
Yes, so this is the thing, and it's a real example of a real case that happened only a few years ago.
Yeah.
On the basis of the equivalent, really, of Peter Dutton's citizenship proposal, the migration equivalent, really.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
Actually, what was it he was guilty of? Like providing a cell phone, wasn't it?
no,
Yeah,
a SIM card.
Yeah.
A SIM
He wasn't
card, not
guilty
a-
of it because he didn't know that it had anything to do with his cousin being a terrorist. He just gave him a SIM card.
Which is what you do. I mean, I give my family I give Austin SIM cards. I mean, come on.
So exactly.
that guy. He was wearing a hood before. We can't trust him, clearly.
No, that Austrian
He's some
pretty
hoodlum.
suspicious. Yeah.
And he's got a funny accent.
Yeah.
The only thing could make it worse if he had brown skin, and then it'd be the holy trifecta of...
Yeah.
I think I've got the brown skin part covered.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
In
I mean,
reality, Austin should be giving me the SIM card.
yeah. To just go back to the precedent thing. I mean, there's already a precedent. Like by the sounds of it, there was this provision back in the Citizenship Act of the 1943 or whatever you were saying before we recorded. Yeah, before we recorded. So there's already a precedent. I don't think that's a terrible precedent. I mean, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to have in that specific case. But yeah, I think
the thing is, Australia is not the only one which has this provision. And so as soon as this thing got mentioned at my workplace, I don't want to talk much about my workplace, but so when you're talking about a whole bunch of engineers, right? We think about law in terms of like mechanics, right? And the first thing that came to mind is, so hang on, Australia can remove citizenship, right? To dual national holders. So what about the other country? What if that other country has the same provision?
Yeah.
Then does it become a race for both those countries to see who can get rid of citizenship the fastest?
probably
Yeah.
it becomes citizenship musical chairs. Whoever.
Citizenship from you can have someone without citizenship. It screws them over, but it is possible. I think it
No. So Australia's law says that you can't, right? Australia says you can only do it if they've got no citizenship with someone else. So the question is, right?
Or let's take my hypothetical case. Let's say I go join the New Zealand army and Australia decides to invade, and I'm like, well, I don't want to lose my Australian citizenship, so I renounce my American citizenship as quickly as possible in an effort to effectively keep my Australian individuals, of course, that if they really want to, they can quickly renounce their secondary citizenship.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a very
what I was
clever
gonna say.
idea, Austin.
Yeah.
I applaud you for your quick thinking.
Yeah,
I think the main problem is you'll still get caught by the Australian army because New Zealand's not going to last very long in that fight, and that's saying something.
Look, if there was a war between Australia and New Zealand, I already know which horse I'd back.
Yeah.
the hobbits.
Not far lap.
Oh.
Yeah, but anyway, so the first thing we discussed, so the first thing we came up with, is there's this race to see who drops who first. Then the next question came up, right? There are certain countries in the world, right? Certain countries, like Israel, which has the right of return for every Jew, right? You don't necessarily have to be an Israeli citizen, but if you happen to be Jewish and can prove your lineage, you can take up Israeli citizenship anytime you want. Yep.
Like me.
You're safe, Zeev.
Yeah, Zeev's fine. So other countries like that include Britain, India, China, Japan, and a whole bunch of like Middle Eastern countries as well, right? Like if you were born in that country at any time, you can go back, right? So the question is now, how does the Australian government rule on that, right? Is it like, okay, so like for example, I'm an Australian, right? And I happen to go to, let's pick a random country, Chile.
Okay.
I go to Chile, right? And I take up dual citizenship there. Not actually possible, but in this mythical world, it's possible. So I now have dual citizenship with Chile. They go to war, right? Now Chile drops. Now I basically decide. I don't know how the mechanics for this would work.
Hypothetical.
Yeah, this is a very complicated hypothetical because I didn't think about this in advance. But let's just say I somehow lost citizenship to both those countries, right? And it was done so on the proviso that, you know, because I can always go back to India and claim my citizenship there, right? Is that an actual scenario? Like, would I be able to lose citizenship from both countries?
Well, I mean, I guess it's one of those things.
Oh, actually, no. Let me rechange that. Okay, so British and Australian dual national holder, and in Chile, I joined Chile's army. So both Britain and Australia both race to, you know, get rid of my citizenship.
The moon is full.
Yeah.
I fucking don't care. I'll be honest.
I mean, to be fair, like, okay, this may be a terrible change, but I seriously doubt it's going to be used in lots and lots of cases. Like, I very much, you know, even if you apply to...
all about the marginal cases.
Well, I do, yeah, and I'm not disputing that, but I mean, it's like having all these hypotheticals is good and well, but I think in the end, there will only be marginal cases because it's just the way these things work, you know, and the amount of people who would be covered by this sort of law is pretty small. And if we get to the stage where it becomes a very large group, I think we'll have bigger problems than this law alone. So, yeah. Anyway, I guess we'll have to leave it on that note because we've run out of time. So, yeah, we'll be back again next week. We'll be talking more about Liberty. And thanks to you guys for joining us. And thanks to everybody at home who's watching.
Thank you.
Bye.